Welcome to the Centre for Optimism's conversation on optimism and leadership with Kathleen Schafer, founder of the Human Being Store, the chairman of the Centre for Optimism, Robert Masters, and your host, Victor Perton, Chief Optimism Officer for the Centre for Optimism. Welcome Kathleen Schafer, founder of the Human Being Store. Welcome Robert Masters, chair of the Centre for Optimism, and I'm Victor Perton, Chief Optimism Officer for the Centre for Optimism. Kathleen Schafer is a trailblazer in leadership development, and if you want to Google her, you'll see her amongst the top 20 quotes from American businesswomen in the last decade. And her passion is for those who want to impact in the public good, whether it's in politics or NGOs or corporates. For nearly 30 years, and she must have started when she was 10.
Thank you.
Being a leadership coach and author. And what she knows, living in Michigan, she noticed this dearth of training in political leadership and created the Michigan Political Leadership Program in 1992 to help emerging leaders understand how to be effective candidates and office holders. It was the first of her many innovations, and now, of course, she's moved to the state of innovation and optimism, California, to guide others to live leadership and a practice you've dedicated your career to cultivating. A couple of weeks, Kathleen visited the Centre for Optimism, and now back in Santa Barbara, I think you're in?
Just outside of Santa Barbara, yes.
You've joined us on this webcast conversation on optimism. So, Kathleen, tell us, what makes you optimistic?
Well, first, I just want to start by saying thank you to both of you for having me here today, and Victor for welcoming me to the center as you did so graciously a few weeks ago, because it's nice to meet kindred spirits in the work that we're doing. And for me, while I haven't referred to it in the same way as optimism, we both come from the same place, which is what makes me optimistic is that we as individuals have so much to offer the world. And through the offering of our gift, while you come to the Human Being Stores to get your gift, that's where we really experience personal joy and the satisfaction of working and contributing to others, which fuels that sense of possibility or optimism about being able to address the challenges that we face in the world today.
That's superb. So tell us more about the Human Being Store. I love the name. I love the emotion it evokes. So tell us a bit about the evolution from 1992 observing problems in Michigan to now being the founder and CEO of the Human Being Store.
Sure. So Michigan, and in 1992, I was much younger and started that program because, as you said, we weren't really preparing people to lead, and did that work. And after doing that and getting that up and going, I wanted to get more directly involved in working to elect people, particularly women and other underrepresented groups, to office, which I started doing. And did that for a number of years. And through my work with candidates at that time mostly, I came to understand that people run for office for the most part for all the right reasons. There is a sincerity of wanting to better the world. The challenge is that most people are not anchored in their gift, in who they are as a leader and what they want to contribute, so that when they go into the political system as it is and has increasingly become in these intervening years, the system takes over and it becomes about power rather than about impact. So I then had an opportunity to teach at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., which I did for 15 years, and created really what has become the field of political leadership, and developed a model and a system that I continue to use today. I call it the Leadership Connection Model. And from there, taught it all over the world. And late 2008, 2009, 2010, began to see what's happening. I mean, it's all over here. I'm sure it's all over the world of what's going on in our political system in the US right now, that it was going to happen. And that's when I moved to California, as you said, the place of optimism, because I wanted to be a part of innovating and creating solutions. And that's what the human being story is about. It's about scaling the model. It's about making the work accessible. And the work is that each one of us has something unique to offer the world, that as we understand and know what that is, we're better able to engage in the organizations in which we live and work. And through better engagement, healthier engagement, we can have the desired impact that we wish to see in the world. So a very quick summary of the last 30 years of my career.
Well, we at the Centre for Optimism believe that the times call for realistic and infectiously optimistic leadership. And you've been observing leadership for a long time, but you're very much involved in contemporary leadership. Who are the infectiously optimistic leaders who've inspired you?
Well, people ask me this question quite often, and one of the reasons I find it a little challenging to answer it is that most of the people that I know that inspire me and are the kinds of leaders that you would call infectiously optimistic are not the ones that are on the national stage or the world stage. They're the people with whom I work, locally, with different organizations. Some are clients. I have one client who was a partner in a law firm, worked for many years for one of the big tech companies, and left it because he endeavored to make the practice of law more effective and more humane for attorneys and to have a better impact. There's people like this all over the place. And one of the things that I encourage people to do is to believe and feel and know that most of the people who are changing the world are not the people that we're seeing day in and day out on, the television. Rather, they're our friends and our neighbors and our colleagues.
Robert, I think you had some questions to ask.
I did. Victor, Kathleen, I was wondering, when you're talking about the leadership, the current situation in the US in relation to the president, how do you see that would change from where he's currently at? When I assume you're referring to him in a power situation, how do you see him changing, or will he change into a much more cohesive administration, and one which has a base of optimism associated with it?
Well, I don't, quite frankly, and this is not a partisan comment, at all. There's nothing that indicates a desire to change or evolve. And in fact, the way he's conducted himself, I always say the most authentic leader wins elections. And, people may not always like or agree with how authentic or what that authenticity is, but Donald Trump has pretty much been as advertised. And there really are no surprises here other than the fact that he continues to comport himself in the way that he said he would. I mean, early on, he said, I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and nobody would do anything. And again, without any kind of politics involved, that's pretty much what he's done as president. I can do whatever I want. So I don't see a lot of shift in him, where I would say for you guys, the idea of optimism and what can come is, this is a real moment of choice for the American public about what kind of leader represents us. Are we looking at, the pessimist who, kind of says, I can do whatever I want and it doesn't matter? Or are we going to hold our elected officials and indeed ourselves to a higher standard?
And when you're saying that, to hold people to a higher standard, that's reflected in the polls to a certain extent, but also the media's role. And the media in Australia, in particular, is becoming very much one which is not balanced in their reporting, but very much, I would say, siding with certain beliefs and certain leaders. Do you see the media having a greater influence as far as changing community attitudes?
Well, the media is certainly influential. I come back to the idea that ultimately it's each one of us who has the responsibility to be able to decide how we're going to engage in our citizenry, our society, our communities, our government. What I feel has happened is that in the last, 15, 20 years, but it grows exponentially almost daily, is we have so much access to information. I mean, we can click a few buttons, we can talk to each other, around the world. I mean, there's so much available. And yet at this moment when we can connect, and particularly what you're trying to do around, the optimism and the good, what so many people are doing is that they're becoming hyper-focused. And they're screening out so much of, what's coming at them, some of it just for survival. But in that hyper-focus, they're dismissing or rejecting any information that is not what they're looking for, they want to hear. So what you're getting at least from my perspective, is we're losing the ability and the muscle of being able to take in a broader sense of the situation and the desire to do so, and to hold that cognitive dissonance in a way that allows us to resolve it as opposed to ignore it.
So to bring about that change, what would you advocate as to exactly how that change could occur?
Well, to me, that's you want to talk about what makes me optimistic. People make me optimistic, is, the ability that each one of us can do that. I mean, we've all heard the Margaret Mead quote, never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. I mean, just like we talk about having access to so much information, we too have the ability to impact others. And it's not, it's how we show up at the office. It's how we engage in meetings. Each day, are we contributing to the betterment of the groups and organizations, even our family, or are we more and more a reflection of this hyper-focused negativity? And so ultimately that choice resides with each individual. So how do we do that? For me, and that's what my life and work is about, it's allowing individuals to really know and understand that they are indeed leading their lives, whether they're choosing to do so or not. And the more conscious they become of that choice to be a leader, the better off they're going to be and our world's going to be.
Robert, as you know, I mean, one of the things we say in our presentation at the Centre for Optimism is the leader looks like the person in your mirror. And that resonated for us in prison, it's resonated in large conferences, and it's not often expressed. People look for leadership. There's a very famous Australian historian, Kathleen, called Geoffrey Blaney. And Jeff says he's just bewildered by the extent to which people allow their optimism to be dictated by political leadership.
And I would, yes, absolutely. And by the external. I mean, we can't control what's going on in the world. I mean, think about it. Even in the last, few days here with the coronavirus and things that are going on. I mean, what's happening in the world is changing at such a remarkable pace that the only thing that we can control is ourselves. And, how we're connected to who we are as a person, to what we put out, and to what we offer to others. And that's where our inspiration and our power comes from, not from trying to control or get all the external circumstances to work the way we want it to.
Well, Gandhi, I think, expressed it, didn't he? Essentially, the only person you can change is yourself. And it's interesting, Martin Seligman, the leader of positive psychology, in his last book, Hope, in fact, again, emphasizes the need for self-mastery, which is exactly what you and Rob are exemplifying and promoting.
Absolutely. And, the interesting thing is how many people feel like that's the harder decision to make. Like it's easier for me to just show up and my boss tells me what to do, or, you know, my religious leader tells me what to do, or my political leader tells me what to do. And they feel like that's going to keep them safe and protected. And again, as all of these systems, you know, come under such stress and struggle, people are understanding you can't rely on that anymore. I mean, that's why I believe there's so much anxiety, there's so much going on in the world, is because the default option has been to trust our leaders instead of to understand and trust ourselves.
The figures are extraordinary, Kathleen. There's a Royal Commission, which is our highest form of government inquiry in the state of Victoria. The statistics they've pulled out of the health records show that diagnosed anxiety and depression in a safe country like Australia has doubled this century.
Mm-hmm.
So something's going wrong.
Well, or something's going right, we just haven't understood what that is. And what's going wrong, at least from, my perspective, is that from an industrialized model, people could show up at, the assembly line and they could do their little part day in and day out, and they would get paid and they would go back, and, life was safe. But that isn't how the world is operating any longer. So again, that trust and that those external things are going to keep us safe, or they're going to provide for us, are diminishing. And the reason there's such anxiety is that there hasn't been an alternative model that's been presented to people that allow them to understand that they're the power and that they have a choice. One of the things I say, I just did a talk on this, is everyone should feel self-employed, regardless of whether or not you're working in an organization. That sense of, I'm the one who's responsible for my career, I'm the one who's responsible for my salary or promotions, or not some external thing. And when you take back that power, there isn't any anxiety because you're connected to yourself.
And the Dalai Lama says the only person who can make your day at work good or great is yourself. No one else is looking out for you to make your day great.
Right. And it doesn't mean that things aren't going to happen. I mean, I know that one of the criticisms that gets lobbed at people like us is you're just very Pollyanna-ish, and wouldn't this be great? And, yes, but let me tell you about the real world, right? And, you get what you expect. And again, it doesn't mean that things aren't going to come at you and there aren't going to be challenges. What it means is that those challenges or those things that come up, if you understand it, cannot disconnect you from you and your gift, and the trust that you being able to put that out in the world is what creates your safety.
Now, Rob and Kathleen, you're both great strategists. Rob, I think we're really going to try and move now on to the area that most corporations and NGOs and like are looking for. How do you create a good strategy these days? Rob, did you have some comments on that?
Yes, Kathleen just mentioned that the trust in leadership is one of the key things that we need in today's society, and to have that has to be part of a strategy that corporations need to embrace. And fortunately or unfortunately, here we had a Royal Commission into the financial institutions, and the number one point that came out of that was the lack of trust that the community had in the financial institutions and also in their leadership. So what's your thoughts as far as injecting a greater degree of trust in the way leaders and strategy needs to be brought together?
Wow. Yeah. Great question. I say, one of the steps of my model is, creating and participating in effective teams or organizations. And to do that, the number one thing that needs to happen is trust, is that building of trust. So what builds trust? I mean, this is kind of the question everyone's asking. Ultimately, it has to be about the individuals, the leaders, but everyone else in the organization talking and conducting themselves the way, we've been discussing, which is authentically, which is coming from a place of service rather than a place of survival. And I probably could, my professor hat could come out here pretty quickly, but I'll attempt to keep it brief. But just like we talked about with the industrial model, Maslow has, the hierarchy of needs, right? And basically you got to survive, and then you can have good relationships, and then you can feel good about yourself, and then you get to, being able to do good in the world. For the leadership connection model, what we do at the Human Being Store, we flip that model on its head. And we say, understand who you are as an individual, what makes you unique, and get clear about how you want to offer that in the world. And as you do that, again, I'm going through it quickly, people will trust you. People will want to come in and join you. And then the idea of the survival, the business, all of that starts to come together. And that is fundamentally where I feel most businesses are. They may mouth a lot of words about, we care and this and that, but their conduct says, I just want to have a bottom line. And, that disconnection people get. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't make money as a business, you shouldn't be successful. What I'm saying is, are you really about serving, or are you really about making money? And if you can bring those two in alignment, people will trust you, and you'll make more money than you ever have.
That goes back to the business schools, because their whole theory is based on the financial bottom line.
Bingo. But that's what's happening. I just talked about this as well. Coming from your part of the world, I'm sure Megxit has been a big headline there, as it has been all over the world, right? You've got two people who essentially have everything that most of us would say we aspire to, unlimited financial resources and, great parties, and they literally live in castles. And what else could any of us want? And yet the thing that mattered most was the ability to be true to themselves and to be of service. So one of the reasons and one of the ways that business has gotten us to where we've gotten is that, to your point, everybody said, well, if you just make enough money, you'll be happy. But that isn't true. What makes people truly happy is to be of service and to be at their best and express themselves. Then the money flows, and now you're happy and you have money, instead of having money and being miserable.
So how do you see this coming about now? Do you see it through the people themselves, as in the employees actually standing up, and as Victor said, when you look in the mirror of the morning, saying, the leadership is the person that's being reflected there? Are you advocating that people actually stand up a lot more, or are you advocating that the leaders themselves, or the aspiring leaders, take on a greater focus on service and outcomes from that?
Well, it's got to be both. I've spent the last number of years working primarily with C-suite, and working with C-suite leaders who are endeavoring to do it a different way. And that's, the process I take them through. What they would continually say is their greatest challenge is how to get their employees motivated, inspired. That's where their greatest challenges are coming from. So that was why we launched the Human Being Store. Was we understood that it's not just the C-suite who needs this, but boy, do they. It's also being able to provide this new framework to, early and mid-career professionals, because it's got to be everyone. And let me tell you, the people who grab onto this most readily are young people. And it's a little bit of why we have, what we have in terms of challenges with the job market currently, is because a lot of young people are very reluctant to engage in transactional exchanges for work that they simply do not enjoy. So to me, it's a economic imperative that business leaders and any kind of organizational leader begin to think like this, because their workforce is starting a mutiny, and it's going to continue to come. We've got to join meaning and contribution together in order to be economically viable.
Are you saying, well, the foundations of meaning has to have optimism incorporated into it?
Well, I mean, to me, this is just, when you know who you are, when you know what you have to contribute, your talents, your strengths and skills, when you're clear about that, and you're in an organization that is allowing that to come forward and continue to grow and evolve, and that's what we talk about, you can't help but be optimistic. I mean, that's just, to Victor, that's the infectious optimism, right? Oh, here comes a problem. We can deal with this. Oh, this has happened. Let's figure out how to do that. Most of the challenges, like we could just look at the Boeing issue recently. Those issues came about not because employees were clear, aligned, leading, connected, and optimistic. They were afraid they were going to lose their job. So nobody sat at the table and said, hey guys, this plane doesn't work.
Now that is a great intro to the area where both of you are terrific experts, and that's innovation. And in Australia, there was a report, Kathleen, just after you left Australia, where Morgan Gallup poll, which is our largest pollster, which has been going for about 50 or 60 years, had their lowest ever figures for Australian optimism and their highest ever figures for Australian pessimism. And what's interesting is, as optimism has tracked down, so has innovation. And so what we say is you can't be an innovator unless you're optimistic. Like Dyson and his 5,000 attempts at the perfect vacuum cleaner, or Edison and his attempts at the vacuum bulb. So Kathleen and Rob, what do you see as the essence of the relationship between innovation and optimism? And what do you see there in California and Santa Barbara, Kathleen?
Well, all over. What I would say, because you're right on it, which is, and we talk with our clients about this all the time, if you know what it is, excuse me, that you have to offer the world, and you feel good about it, and it could be something that people haven't seen, or maybe isn't quite there, or a job that you'd love to do, but there isn't actually a job opening for it, and you go out and you trust and believe in it enough, that's how you're going to create it, right? That's innovation. That's what innovation is people believing in themselves and believing something that can be done that hasn't previously been done. And that can only come from somebody who has that orientation. Pessimism is we can't, we won't, we don't, it has never happened before. If one more person asks me, show me where somebody else has done this, I'm like, can't show you that because this is the first time this is being done, right? But if I stopped, this is where I really want to be, get in very key and core with your viewers, is that if I didn't know and understand that this is my gift, that this is my passion, that this is what turns me on, I would have stopped. Do you know how many people have told me I'm crazy over the years to be talking like this? So that's the challenge for so many people, is that one person says no, and they don't go any further or farther in their work. But when you understand that it's you, and if you're wanting to offer it, that people in the world are out there wanting it, then your orientation isn't yes or no. Your orientation is, how do I find the people who are matched up, wanting what it is I have to offer? Then you get innovation, because you've got optimistic people offering the best of themselves.
Well, the time has flown. We've reached the half hour. Rob, were there any other questions you wanted to ask, or a last point you wanted to make?
No, I fully agree with Kathleen. I think inspiration to bring about change is what is required, and that's required from the people themselves and from the leaders in particular. It gets back to what Kathleen was saying right at the start, that leaders go into their positions with a certain amount of sincerity, and it's up to them to maintain that sincerity in everything they do as far as an outcome is concerned, and not being taken over by the system.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Kathleen, is there anything we didn't ask you that we should have asked, or is there a last point you want to make?
Well, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, obviously, so, which shows how infectiously optimistic we are about all of this. If I had one, I guess, last point, it's that everyone has something important to contribute. Everyone is a leader, and it doesn't mean that it needs to look like, somebody in a corner office somewhere. I, say leadership is love in action. And my, call to action for the viewers of this is, when you figure out what that is, the world's going to be better off when you and as you begin off.
Kathleen, can I share something funny? I was recently in Arizona and on a bus stop in Scottsdale. And being at a bus stop in Scottsdale is not a productive way to spend your time, but I used my time. I asked a man what made him optimistic, and he had prison tats on, and he had a ski jacket on in 30 degree centigrade heat. And he looked at me and he quoted 5 passages from, he just got out of jail, 4 years in jail, quoted 4 passages from Romans, the epistle, and then said to me, but it's all about love. And I think, Kathleen, you've nailed it. Rob, you've nailed it. Thank you both. I think we're going to have to do this again in 2 or 3 months, because we could spend hours and hours.
Yeah, we'd love to.
So grateful to you both. Kathleen Schafer from Santa Barbara, Rob Masters from Australia, and this is the Centre for Optimism. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll chat offline at another time.
Great, thank you.
Well, we are so grateful to Kathleen and Robert to join us in this webcast. We're grateful for you joining us, listening in. We'd be grateful for your thoughts as well. So visit our website, centreforoptimism.com. You'll find a great set of materials there. You can sign up as a member or a subscriber. If it doesn't suit you and you'd like to have a free subscription, you could contact me through the contacts there. And if you are a person of talent like Kathleen and Robert, and you'd like to join us for a webcast interview as well, that would be very welcome indeed. So have a great day, have an optimistic day, and remember to your homework. Ask a friend, ask a colleague, what makes you optimistic? You'll find they'll feel better and you'll feel better too.